Hello everyone and welcome back to Always Watching. Today I'm discussing my thoughts on the White Lotus season 3 before the finale. The drama takes place in Thailand this time around, and it's the same story, different mess. White Lotus began as what feels like a limited series, and whether or not it's overstayed its welcome, I'll leave that up to you. The season is definitely more engaging than the last. The atmosphere they've created, the tension, I feel like I'm really sucked in. I also love the contrast between the different characters, especially as they start to venture outside of the hotel and interact with people outside of their sphere. One episode left. It's really hard to know with this show if the payoff will be worth it. Starting with what I liked, I think the cast is exceptional. However, I think some storylines work a lot better than others. The series is set in Thailand, which is depicted as a premier location for passport bros trying to avoid, escape, or exploit others for gain. A huge theme in the show is classism, how these wealthy guests exploit the workers or people outside of their sphere to either find themselves or resolve some type of issue they're having. And this whole theme of classism and power can be seen even within the guests as they jockey for power between themselves. This is particularly true with Greg and Belinda, the only two common threads from the previous two seasons. Greg set up his wife Tanya to be killed in season 2, and now his great escape is being threatened by Belinda. From what we find out last season, Greg knows a lot of very dangerous people and he's not afraid to call on them. He lives in this giant house not very far from the White Lotus. The hotel, as well as half of Thailand, is owned by this couple. From what we know, the husband, Jim in particular, is a nasty man who has done a lot of shady things to become as influential as he is. One of my favorite lines this season is when Rick confronts Jim and asks him if he has been good to Thailand. People like Jim come to Thailand in order to create a safe haven for themselves at the expense of the people around them. It would not be surprising if Greg's decision to live very close to the White Lotus has to do with his relationship to this very shady couple. And I think this season tries a lot harder than previous seasons to weave in different storylines. You have Tim and his family becoming increasingly more entangled with Greg and his sugar baby. You then have Rick and Chelsea, who are also becoming more entangled with Greg. You then have these petty women who exist on their own, and their only connection to the violence on this resort is when Lori discovers that one of the workers, Valentine, and his friends are responsible for a robbery at the resort. Finally, you have the security guard Guy Talk and his very flimsy relationship to Mook, who is just there to constantly remind him that if he doesn't step up his game, she's gone. I think the series does a decent job of using the robbery to weave in these two storylines between the security guard and these petty women. I feel like there's enough tension so far with each of these characters, because at the moment it feels like they are all capable of murder. I can see Guy Talk killing Tim. I can see Guy Talk killing Valentine. I can see Jacqueline killing Lori, Lori killing Jacqueline. I can honestly see Tim just killing everyone. Because the series is set in Thailand, I do appreciate their attempts to weave in this Buddhist philosophy into the main storyline. Buddhism forbids violence in every form. It particularly encourages restraint in the most tense of circumstances. One of the standout scenes is when Guy Talk is discussing the robbery, and he explains that he wasn't afraid of the robbers, he was afraid of the potential for violence in that situation. Now, although Buddhism discourages violence, sometimes it is unavoidable and inevitable. This is especially true if abstaining from violence could cause more harm. For example, will Rick's decision to leave that old man alone kill Chelsea? Will Guy Talk's this indecision pretty much in every circumstance? He doesn't confront him. He doesn't really fight as hard as he could regarding those robbers, regarding those Russians. Will this lead to some sort of bigger massacre? Will Belinda's indecision to take Greg's offer result in her death or even her son's? And what if Jacqueline's decision to sleep with Valentine totally unravels Lori? Starting with Rick, his storyline has been all over the place. The series really builds up this confrontation between Rick and Jim. Rick knows very little about his father. For whatever reason, he's very sure about what happened. Like, he speaks about it very vaguely. And to be honest, I don't think he has as much information as he thinks he does. The reason he's so sure his father was this good man is because his mother told him so on her deathbed. And Rick strikes me as a very skeptical individual. It's very strange to me that he doesn't look into whether or not what his mother was saying was true. He has such a high opinion of his father despite not knowing him at all. And his mother, I mean, we're told that she's a drug addict. You get the sense that maybe she told him these things as a way to make him feel better. And Rick really holds on to this idea of his father being this decent person who was trying to do the right thing in Thailand, I think as a way of creating an avenue of redemption for himself. If his father was a good person, that means that he has the potential to also become a good person. Now, we don't know what Rick does, but you get the sense that he's not the most upstanding of characters. The interaction between Jim and Rick was interesting because as soon as Jim heard his mother's name, he looked like surprised, almost like he's like, oh, like he didn't seem disappointed, but Rick pulled out that gun before Jim could explain. Now, the general theory is that Jim is his father, but I get the sense that Rick, like everybody else in Thailand, may have flown too close to the sun. Maybe he made the wrong enemies. And I feel like his dad might have been just as shady or even more shady than Jim. Now, why this is dangerous, if Rick had come on his own, I think he would have been fine. But he brought Chelsea with him. And his sort of decision to expose himself to Jim and then run away, I think will come back to haunt him. Now, Rick's relationship to Chelsea at first made no sense to me, and Chelsea in the beginning struck me as very petty and insecure. I thought her comments about Mook in episode 1 felt very petty. Like, you got the sense that she barely has a hold on Rick. And the way that Rick talked to Chelsea in the beginning, I'm like, why did you bring her? He was obviously very annoyed with her. He seemed like he was tolerating her. The relationship really did feel like a sugar daddy, sugar baby thing. However, it's not until Rick informs us about why he came to Thailand that his character and their relationship are given some depth. I feel like Rick has gotten more sympathetic and more likable as the series has gone on. We don't know, again, what Rick does, but like every other passport bro on this island, it's probably something very shady. There is no shortage of scammy white men in Thailand and beautiful women willing to tolerate their behavior. Now, granted, not all of these men are involved in illegal activity. Some came to find love. However, everything feels so transactional when it comes to these foreigner relationships. You get the sense that if these men could not afford to bring them on these yachts, these women would be gone. I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoy the contrast between Chloe and Chelsea. Chloe is with Greg because it's the best of a bad situation. Constantly worried about Greg's opinion of her because she knows that this is not love. This is out of convenience. And she also knows that the odds of finding a man this stable and this wealthy is slim to none. Based on her description of him, she definitely knows that he's dangerous or he's capable of doing dangerous things. And maybe her sort of reluctance to push against Greg might result in more than just him leaving her. Chelsea, on the other hand, is in love with Rick. She feels like she has the capacity to heal him, and I feel like she infantilizes him to the point where she really underestimates what this man is capable of. One of the standout scenes this episode was that boat party, which felt like a scammer and tax evaders conference. Tim and his family are invited to this boat party hosted by Greg and his sugar baby. We meet a slew of men who are not only capable of moving money, but hiding bodies as well. And one of the slowest and most frustrating storylines is with regards to Tim and his family. From the first episode, we are told that Tim is going to jail. Tim's character is incredibly frustrating because ever since we found out that his back's against the wall, he's done almost nothing to try to get out of it. I think the way that Tim is behaving, I don't think whatever happened, whatever he was involved in, this is not something that he's usually involved in. Like, he doesn't strike me as a career scammer because I feel like someone who was always involved in that type of activity would move quickly. And he is surrounded by scammers. So he could easily reach out to the people around him and ask for a way out. Instead, he almost seems paralyzed. And I was thinking that maybe the reason that he's so paralyzed is because it could be that he took financial advice from his son and whatever deal they were involved in backfired, and now he's contemplating whether or not he wants to take the fall for him. From what little we know about Tim, he's a choir boy. He's presented as a man that is as decent as someone in finance can be. And the idea of losing everything, specifically losing his family, has him contemplating suicide and family annihilation. And Tim is totally disconnected from the series. I mean, he is pretty much inactive, and everybody recognizes that, including his son. And his son Saxon is a particularly shady and nasty young man. Saxon is introduced to us as this unbearable Nepo baby who's more concerned with his own success than his father's stability and well-being. And I think this is something that his father notices because in the last episode, Saxon makes it clear that if he's not a success, he's nothing. And something about the way Tim was looking at him as if in that moment he decided he was going to throw him under the bus. This is something that Tim clocks, and I'm not sure what decision he will come to in the final episode. But I definitely think that whatever's going on with the family business is tied to Saxon. And the question now is, do we sacrifice one for the many? And who is that one going to be? Because the way that Saxon was talking, he made it clear that he will do anything for success. And I don't think his father is the same way. Like, I don't think Tim is someone who will do anything for money. But Saxon definitely is. And maybe this is something that Tim doesn't realize until very late. In terms of this Raggedy family, the most interesting people are Saxon and Lachlan. The story this season incorporates a lot of shock value. The first is the kiss between the brothers, this incest storyline. And the second is Rick's friend describing his desire to become an Asian woman. The incest storyline was very weak and very unnecessary. I think the purpose of that storyline was to give Lachlan some depth and also explain why he's interested in staying in Thailand for a year. There's always a character like Lachlan on the show, people who are kind of trying to find themselves, or somehow the trip ended up changing them for the better or teaching them a valuable life lesson. And that's ideally what you want on vacation. You want people to leave more enlightened than when they came, and unfortunately that's not always the case for these guests. At the start, Piper came off as the most enlightened of this family, especially in comparison to her mother, who has some of the best lines this season. However, we see that Piper starts to second guess herself when she ends up staying the night at this Buddhist temple. Now, it's hard to tell if Piper's reluctance is because her brother also wants to stay, or if maybe staying at a Buddhist temple isn't all it's cracked up to be. I think so many people travel to countries like Thailand hoping for some type of spiritual experience, and when it's not exactly as they imagine, they end up being very disappointed. And this is a sentiment echoed by Frank in that very creepy speech. Frank is Rick's friend, Rick's very unnecessary friend who's stuck in Thailand. All we know is that he can't go back to the United States, and likely for good reason. He chose Thailand because he has a fetish for Asian women, a fetish that reaches such base levels that he starts to imagine himself becoming an Asian woman. Frank strikes me as the manifestation of everything wrong with foreigners who settle abroad, especially in places like Thailand. Well, these people who have such privilege, they literally start running out of things to do with it. Which takes us to these three petty women. Now, the relationship between Kate, Jacqueline, and Lori has been honestly the highlight this season for me. From the beginning, you sense that this was kind of a frenemy situation. Like, the only reason they've kind of kept in touch with each other is because they went to school together. And from episode 1, Lori was the black sheep of the group. Lori and Jacqueline, this tension between Lori and Jacqueline has been building up right from the start. We find out that Lori is a lawyer who lives in New York, who's currently paying palimony to her husband. Kate lives in Texas with her family, and Kate is the worst. She's that type of person that tries to be neutral to kind of avoid conflict, but all she does is make it worse. And then you have Jacqueline, this B-list aging actress who lives for male attention. And as the series goes on, these women start to realize that they are complete strangers to each other. Out of the three, Jacqueline to me is the absolute worst, because Jacqueline is in a relationship with a man who never picks up the phone. And you have Kate, who's married. And Jacqueline is just not a girl's girl. She encourages Lori to have this kind of fling, and she ends up sleeping with him herself. And there's something very nasty about Jacqueline, because she almost gets off not only on the attention but on the disappointments of others. Like, she needs to feel like validated. She creates competition where there is none. Now, granted, it might have been a blessing in disguise for Lori, especially now that we know that Valentine and these Russians are involved in this robbery. However, I think Jacqueline in particular is, again, she's this B-list aging actress, and she brings her supporting characters with her. Like, the only reason she's in touch with these two women is because she can be the star of the show. And the more tension there is between the characters, the more they try to look for solutions outside of the hotel. But all that does is make them hyper aware that they are the problem, and it puts pressure on them to try and resolve these problems as quickly as possible. And when you're under a lot of pressure, I mean, pressure either makes diamonds or bursts into flames, and that's where we are so far. Now, I don't know how this season will end. I think it could be spectacular, or it could be a complete dud. I think this season did a really, really good job of even weaving in season 1 and season 2. And all 3 have felt like slow burns, and this could actually be the massive payout, especially if they're somehow able to tie Belinda and Greg into this whole thing. Now, in terms of who's going to die, I mean, that's always the question. To be honest, I could see a number of people dying. I could see Rick dying. I could see Belinda dying. I could see Chelsea dying. I could see Lori somehow dying after confronting Valentine. Like, you never really know where all this is going. However, I have high hopes. Like, I don't know what it is about this season, but I have been kind of glued in week to week, which is something that I haven't really experienced since season 1. And so you guys let me know what you think, and until next time.